John Yarmuth, our guest, as we mentioned, is ready now, joining us live from the Cannon House Office Building. Nice to see you, Congressman. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Susan. Good to be with you.
I have a headline. It says, U.S. Rep. Yarmuth, deep budget cuts cost jobs. Make your case, please.
Well, we know, for instance, in my district that just a few weeks ago, one of our defense contractors laid off 51 people. And the reason they did it was not because they didn't have the work. It was just that they anticipated that budget cuts were going to reduce the work. This is going on all over the country. Government spending accounts for about 40% at all levels, 45% of total spending in the economy. The federal budget is 25% of gross domestic product. You can't cut government spending without having an impact on jobs, and it's not necessarily government jobs, bureaucracies, as in the case of the company in my district. That's just a private contractor working on a defense project who's cutting jobs. So you cannot cut government spending without losing jobs. It just doesn't work that way.
How do you see the next 24 hours playing out, Mr. Yarmuth?
Well, it's going to be, it's interesting. I think what we saw over the last day and when we marked up the 2012 budget in the Budget Committee, that a lot of the new Republican members particularly are very ideologically rigid. And when you say this is going to have this impact on the economy or whatever, they say that's okay, this is just not the legitimate role for the federal government. So it's not necessarily you're saying, I'd like to spend this much, I'd like to spend this much, let's kind of split the difference. It's we don't care what the number is, we're not going to spend it. That makes it very difficult to negotiate. And so it looks to me like Speaker Boehner has a real problem on his hands because he has 87 or so new members who really don't care whether you blow up the government. They're just here, that's what they're here to do.
We have heard the Republicans say that we're in this situation because the last Congress didn't pass a budget. What is your explanation for why the last Congress didn't pass a budget?
Well, first of all, the actual inside baseball is that there were not enough votes to pass a budget. I was on the Budget Committee in the last Congress. We did report a budget out to the full House, and the Speaker and our leadership determined they didn't have the votes to pass it. But we did pass last December a budget enforcement agreement that basically set the same kind of caps on various categories of spending that a budget would have done. So that's not the reason we're in the problem we are. The reason we're in the situation we are is that over the past decade, we have lost an awful lot of jobs. The jobs that have remained and been created have been at lower wages. Tax revenues are at the lowest rate as a percentage of the economy in 60 years. And when you take somebody and they are paying taxes and then all of a sudden they're unemployed, it's a double whammy because you lose the tax revenue and you have to increase government services to support that person. So that's the reason. I mean, we're just in a very, very difficult economic situation. It's not because of some budget document that was or wasn't passed last year.
Before calls, let me move on to the 2012 budget produced by Mr. Ryan and marked up yesterday in the Budget Committee. You were a pretty active participant yesterday. What was your takeaway of the session? Well,
I think it was that the Republicans on that committee, and I think they're reflective of this new breed of Republican, and because half of the Republicans on the committee are new members, are basically committed to minimizing the role of the federal government. It is an ideologically driven position. It's a philosophy. I'm not criticizing it. I don't happen to agree with it. But on every issue, we heard time and time again, well, we understand that's a valuable program. We understand that it's important to support police and firefighters and so forth in our districts, but that's not the role of government. So what we've seen is a slash and burn approach to budgeting. And again, the thing that's very frustrating is that you've heard time and time again, we don't have a revenue problem, we have a spending problem. Well, it's like the Republicans don't think there's a second side of the ledger. And every household has an income side and an expenditure side. Every business does as well. They basically say the tax side is off the table and we're going to concentrate and balance the budget basically by slashing spending. I introduced an amendment at the markup to increase taxes back to the Clinton-era tax rate, maximum tax rate of 39.6 on people whose adjusted gross income was over $1 million. Over $1 million. It would have saved $350 billion over 10 years. Not one Republican voted for it. They just have this almost religious fervor that you can't touch taxes even though, again, we have one of the, as a percentage of the economy, we have the lowest taxes we've had in 60 years.
And we're looking at some scenes from that markup yesterday. It's time for us to go to telephone calls for Congressman John Yarmuth of Kentucky. Let's take a call from Coldwater, Michigan. Richard's a Republican there.
Oh, yeah. Good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, my question for the congressman there, it would be this. I worked for a company which was the largest TV producer company in the world, and they had closed and laid off 5,000 people and moved to China. Their stated reason for that was that the taxes in China were zero or nearly zero, and that they could, function better and more profitably by moving out of the country. And isn't this happening with hundreds of companies every month? That's my question. Thanks.
Well, it is happening to a lot of countries, and I'm not against looking at our corporate tax situation and seeing if it makes sense to change it. In China, for instance, though, there are different ways they have a managed economy, as you know, and foreign companies go to China, and particularly from the United States, we allow them to deduct the taxes they pay in China. So what they do is go and they say to the Chinese government, charge us a lot of tax. We'll get to deduct that in the United States off our corporate tax picture, and then build us a factory and build roads to it and so forth. So they basically get their facilities for free, and we subsidize that. So there are things we can look at that will change that picture. But I happen to have a General Electric production facility in my district. They're bringing back almost 1,000 jobs just in 2 lines, and 400 of them are from China, because what they figured out is that when you reduce the supply chain from 10,000 miles to zero, and you make some other changes, there's really not a lot of economic benefit to make something in China if you're going to sell it in the United States. So it's not all a bleak picture, and it does work 2 ways, but I don't have any problem with looking at corporate tax rates and see if we can do it more effectively to keep American jobs here.
We learned from our first congressional guest, Congressman Mick Mulvaney of South Carolina, that the Republican Study Committee, of which he is a member, is proposing an alternate budget today. I use that as a lead-in to this tweet from Matt S., who says, question for the representative. I think we desperately need a budget proposal from the Dems showing our budget priorities. Is this being worked on?
It is, and actually we'll have a House Democratic budget proposal within the next couple of days. But you got to remember, too, there is a Democratic budget on the table, and that's the president's budget. He has submitted that budget document. So it's not like the Democratic Party in total has been asleep at the wheel on this. There's a budget out there the president submitted, and the Democrats in the House will submit one as well.
Speaking of the president, we've got a lot of articles in the paper this morning that looks at his leadership style and the risks and rewards for this budget debate. What is your own view of how appropriately active the president has been in the budget debate process?
Well, he was pretty active yesterday. I will tell you this, I get frustrated and have been frustrated the entire time I've been since the president has been in office since early 2009 about the way he's approached some of these, and almost every time at the end his strategy and his process has been successful. So I hate to be too critical of him, because I think ultimately he has been effective. But yeah, I would have liked to have seen him weighed in much more heavily, as long as he would weigh in on the side of a balanced approach to balancing the budget. That's what we don't have. We've seen in the continuing resolutions and in these negotiations that all the Republicans want to do is balance the budget on the backs of the most vulnerable citizens in our country, and not look at millionaires and billionaires and agribusiness and major corporations and oil companies. So I wish he would weigh in and make the case for, again, a more balanced approach.
We'll take our next call from Pensacola.